Da, 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 da. Middle Ages, Renaissance, and the Reformation, 30 years religious wars, absolutist monarchs. Now it's the Enlightenment, Locke and Hobson dare to know. Factories, wood to coal, Industrial Revolution, cry for freedom, then resounds. Vive la France! Decatur and Italy, Garibaldi and the red shirts, Bismarck and Germany, the power behind the throne. Mania starts World War I, Russian Revolution, then there's disillusionment in the world between the wars. Single-party governments, Munich and appeasement. Hitler starts invading, World War II's begun. Cold War tensions escalate, Russia-US conflict, falling of the Berlin Wall, revolting satellite states. 57 EEC established common market, European unity, now it's modern day.
So the video you just saw was made by my Euro students last year. It's from scratch, lyrics, musical composition, illustrations, all the editing, all from scratch, and I'm very proud of them. And it's for you as a review to understand what is to come. And so every time we start kind of a new level to introduce a new chapter, new marker event, I'll have that video available. I hope you enjoyed it. Yes, I'm in it a lot. It's my class. What do you expect? Okay, so we're going to jump into this lecture. It's a little long, but you can pace it out. Long weekend. All right, we're going to jump back into the Middle Ages. We're just going to do a really large overview of what the High Middle Ages has to offer. What are the developments that come out of it? Coming from understanding the hierarchy with how the political structure is, the social structure is in the Middle Ages. We said feudalism was what we saw throughout Europe, especially in Western Europe. In the High Middle Ages, society and civilization is going to pick up, and it's going to improve, so it's not going to seem as dark because of these different developments. The reason why the Middle Ages is seen as the Dark Ages is because of Petrarch, the Renaissance humanist, that labeled it that it was the age of darkness, that there was no classical art or literature existing, and learning wasn't around. But it's really important for us to understand the Middle Ages, because when we get to events like the French Revolution, it'll make sense of why they're not seeing the same amount of change that they're demanding for for centuries, ever since the Middle Ages, and they still held on to a lot of old traditions from the Middle Ages. Okay, all right. So just an outline of what we're going to be covering. We have agricultural improvements, towns and commerce, the decline of feudalism, the rise of national monarchies, the Catholic Church and its dominance, and the establishment of the first universities. Okay, so I'm going to go through as quickly as possible so that this is not too dragged out. Okay, so very simply, we talked about how everything was done on the manor, and you had a lot of farming, not a lot of skilled labor, right? But new technologies are going to come up, right? You have a better plow, you have a 3-crop rotation system, you have a windmill that can grind up your grains for you. Okay, and so because of that, you can actually have more food for people. Over time, you're going to see a population increase. And with the extra food, you can have a surplus now. So with a surplus, you can use that to trade. And so we're saying throughout the High Middle Ages, you're going to see slow and steady growth to the point where over the 3 centuries, from 1000 to 1300, we see that the total population of Europe is 75 million. Okay, let's talk about the towns. This is really important. I'm going to spend a good amount of time on this. Throughout the Dark Ages, in the 9th and 10th century, there weren't really many towns. There weren't really that many merchants. We talked about, the system was very much bartering. And so you have manors that, have self-sufficient running types of economic system where, you have traders that might come every now and then, but for the most part, all your food and your goods are done on the manor where you live. Okay, Venice is going to be one of the first locations where we're going to see long distance trade. With Venice, we're going to see that The reason why people go there, and I have some pictures for you for that, is because it's on an island, and Venice is where they are trying to escape from the barbarians when they're being invaded, and so that's going to be one place we're going to talk about. Genoa is going to be another major town. The fact that money is going to return. Before we talked about how in the Roman Empire, right, you had a currency, but now there isn't. Now you have the bartering and trading, and with money, you have a currency where you can actually use that amongst the different towns to buy goods. Okay, merchants, they're going to establish headquarters in old towns in the Roman Empire. We talked about the Roman Empire was an empire of cities. Okay, there's a difference between a town and a city based upon what the town can offer in terms of its institutions and its development and complexity. But a town, you have just many people, hundreds of people, possibly thousands that live there now, where many people from the local manors that are nearby are going to go to the town, and they're going to shop there as a customer. Okay, so merchants are going to these places as these centers. Over time, we're going to say, the population is going to grow, and because the population grows, you have more people that can, do certain skills and labors, and they're going to slowly develop, leather making, blacksmithing, and so they're going to start moving into these centers, which we call towns, and it's going to have a snowball effect, right? People are going to go to the town more to buy more of these goods, and eventually, if it snowballs enough over two, 3 centuries, local trade is going to develop between town to town. Okay, so we talked about how there was no more local trade; everything was self-sufficient. Slowly, we're coming back, and this is what the High Middle Ages is showing. Okay, the slow development of that. The towns, by 1100, we're going to see that there's going to be a town almost every 20 or 30 miles. Now, just because towns are popping up doesn't mean that they're always so big. But the fact is, local exchange of goods is happening, and also it is a place for people to have an identity with. Okay, so not just economically in making a living, right? But they also are looking there because it fits their lifestyle. For example, feudal law did not work with what was happening in the commercial towns. Traders needed laws that protected them. Traders needed to be understood in the sense that there are certain contracts between someone that's selling the goods and buying the goods. There's often times where there's debt and there's bankruptcy and there's bills, right? So with these types of commercial issues, they're not going to find it on a self-sufficient manner. Okay, so manorialism, their laws and that social structure is not fitting how a town can. Okay, it's not translated over. So towns wanted to establish their own law, their own courts, their own judges. They want to govern themselves, right? They don't want to pay taxes to the nobles because they feel like we have our own society here. We have our own, group of people here that are living together, helping each other. So they want to, break away from feudalism. Merchants don't want to be subject to the lords, and the lords often are jealous of the money that they're making. They're saying, "Oh, it's so easy to make money and stuff." So the lords are trying to prevent these towns from developing. Okay, let's talk about some towns specifically. Italy is going to have a lot of different towns in Venice, Genoa, Pisa, Florence, Milan. When we get to Renaissance, we'll go over these city-states. Okay, these are city-states. Also, along the Danube and Rhine rivers, you have a lot of towns popping up there, and also along the Baltic coast of Northern Europe. Okay, the significance of the rise of towns is essentially that you're seeing that there's a concentration of local trade centers, and they're gaining autonomy. They're gaining their own self-governing power. They're gaining independence, and we're going to see that feudalism is less functional. There's no real reason as to why they want to stay in a feudal system, right? On the picture on the right, I have a town in France, Igumont, and this town showed rapid population growth and stuff during the High Middle Ages. And you can see here there's a wall, okay, and it's going to be fortified. And the reason why is because towns, though we don't have towns in our local cities now today, back then they still had to be protected and fortified from local and nobles that would try to sack the town or even rival towns as well. Okay. All right. So here are some images from Venice when I went to visited Europe back in 2008. This is the Piazza San Marco. Okay, and so this was the Plaza of Saint Mark. Saint Mark is the associated apostle, disciple, saint of Venice. And so if you look at the cathedral, this is the Saint Mark Basilica. A lot of the architecture is very much Byzantine influence, as you can see with the domes, right, and those little like garlic bulb looking things, and even the cross and how it is. Okay. All right. So in the towns, they need certain protections. Just to run through this very quickly, they will form leagues, and these leagues basically are protecting them from bandits or other nobles that are trying to sack them. One of the leagues that you guys recognize could be the Hanseatic League. This takes place in Northern Europe. They are trying to band together and also providing trade amongst each other as well in the North Sea and the Baltic. A few things about urban life is that in certain cities, Italy, in Germany, in Netherlands, they are going to be so advanced in types of urbanization and establishing their towns compared to the rest of Europe that it's going to be hard for them to unify as a country. Okay, it's not until when we get to the 1800s is where we're going to see Italy and Germany finally become a country again. Right now, their city-states are getting stronger, and within these territories, it's hard for them to have a political unity. Whereas in Western Europe, okay, you have England, France, Spain, right? Feudalism is where it rose, feudalism where it's strong, and there is where the towns are not as strong and much weaker. So one thing to note is that in feudalism, the main type of structure is the castle. The castle is in the center, right? The castle is a place of fortification and defense, and then around it is the manor, right, and all the land that the lord or noble owns. Okay, whereas in the towns you have town walls and town towers to protect them. Okay, all right. Guilds are really important that are established during the Middle Ages because it allows them to protect themselves from competition. So if there's any other goods coming outside of their town, they're going to put some taxes on them, and they want to protect their own goods. Each town could have hundreds of guilds. You have the Baker's Guild, the Blacksmith's Guild, right? The Tailor's Guild, the Carpenter's Guild, so many. You cannot practice a trade. You cannot do a certain type of make a certain type of good unless you're in the guild. So that's a one way to protect if you are a blacksmith, if you are a baker. Also in a guild, you're making sure that the quality of the product stays high. There's a standard for that, and also they want to make sure that there's no advertising that the guilds are helping one another, right? All the bakers are just doing their job, but you're not competing for business at all. If you were to sneeze or something like that, like in the marketplace, they would think that you're trying to tip someone off to get their attention to go to you, and guilds don't like that. They just want to protect each other, and everyone outside the guild, they want to block out. Okay, so the goal of the medieval economy was essentially prevent competition, prevent risk, avoid trying to compete with each other, in the sense that your end goal is not to make a lot of money. Your end goal is not to work for profit. You are essentially just fulfilling your role as providing a good. That's pretty much it. Okay. In towns, last few things is that numeracy. Okay, they're working with numbers. You're using Arabic numerals instead of Roman numerals. This is allowing for accounting, right, to develop as well, and also literacy rates. In the towns, we're going to talk about how universities are going to develop. Okay, you're going to learn how to read and write, and this is something that's really significant because before this, right, there wasn't that ability, right? So they've lost the ability of literacy, but now they're trying to bring that back through the towns. Okay, all right, very quickly, the different types of social classes. Okay, so you obviously have the nobles. They are called the landed aristocracy or gentry. Over the time of the High Middle Ages and Late Middle Ages, they're going to become more modern in the sense that they might even move to a town and leave their land if it fits them in their lifestyle to make more money. Okay, but the main thing about the Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, is that the middle class is going to be developed. Remember when we talked about feudalism, right? There's pretty much just the nobles, the vassals, the lords, the vassals, and the peasants, right? There wasn't really a middle class. So the middle class is also known as the bourgeoisie. It's a French word. In the English word, it means burgher, or someone who lives in a town, or someone that lives in a borough. Same thing. They're all the middle class. One thing to know is that with the nobles during the High Middle Ages and the bourgeoisie, the middle class, a lot of times it gets kind of blurry because the middle class is going to make more money and it's going to be kind of on the same level. However, some social differences are going to remain. Who makes up the middle class? Well, the middle class actually has different types of hierarchies. Okay, there's still tiers within the middle class. So you can have those that were of the urban elite, right? Those that are actually governing the towns, they're at the very top. But then you have just your middle class. You have the merchants, the bankers, right? Those that are practicing medicine, tax officials, and then you have your lower middle class, right? They're your retail shopkeepers, your lesser skilled people, your journeymen that are just making goods. Okay, so that's kind of what the middle class looks like. But most in abundance is going to be the urban poor. Okay, the urban poor is where it's those that are not paid by a certain wage. They're unskilled. Okay, they don't have a certain skill. They're not a craftsman, right? They don't have a stable job. They might pick up work for a day or two. They are usually begging. Okay, so the urban poor, they're rampant throughout. They don't have literacy. They don't have education. They're not really that useful. And so the country, whether it's France or England, anywhere in Europe, okay, they're looking at what can we do with so many poor people that are just begging and being a drain on society, essentially. Okay, and then you have the peasants. So the peasants don't really change that much. The poor and the peasants are different. The poor are usually in the towns. The peasants are the ones that are working the farm and doing the labor, and they're living off of the land. Okay. Here's a picture of an Italian nobleman. So even though you can see that the nobles and the nobility, the aristocracy, and the middle class, there's times where it blurs, right? You still have some of the traditional customs that they do, which is, for example, hunting and hawking. Okay. All right. Women in the Middle Ages, really important social category. Townswomen did have some opportunities to be part of guilds. That's true. Okay, they are usually in the guild because their family's in the guild, and that's why they have the ability to get in. Many women are going to be denied political rights, though, and they have a lot of disabilities as far as legally of what they can do and cannot do. And so very few women are set to be very distinct in the High Middle Ages. Here are a couple examples. Hildegard of Bingen. She was this mystic. She started as a nun, right? But ever since she was like 5 or 6 years old, she began to have these visions, and she began to gain this very specific, unique insight of the Old and New Testament. And so she began to preach publicly, which women are not supposed to do, right? And popes and kings would seek her advice. That's very rare, right? And she did not hesitate to ever reprimand them or rebuke them for what they would do wrong. And so she's an example of showing that, there's a possibility that where women could fulfill a role that a man usually does. But she's a very rare case. Another one is Christine de Pizan. She was a Venetian author. Her purpose was to challenge misogyny. Okay, misogyny is the hatred of women. We're going to be going over this entire year because women are always going to be seen as inferior. Okay, so her goal was to tackle misogyny, and she's going to do it through her writing, through language, and she's going to say that women are actually important in society. She wrote about the woman question, okay, and she essentially was saying that, women, right, actually are contributing to society, and by one example of a book that she wrote, The City of Ladies, it was an allegorical story about a society where women are actually appreciated. Women are actually lifted up and praised for what they do. They're defended, and she would be successful in developing these arguments. Okay, All right, feudalism. Why did it decline? Well, by the 13th century, by the 1200s, we're gonna see that feudalism is gonna reach its peak, but it will decline. Okay, so there's no excitement with feudalism anymore. Vassals, okay, are going to take a back seat. Okay, and there's several reasons why vassals are not going to be as important. One is we talked about the return of towns. Feudal law just did not work in towns, and so that, in a sense, is one reason. Another reason why is because money is coming back. Right, the fact that money, what is it used for? Vassals would rather take the money, right, and rather than feel like they need to, pay a service back to the Lord, they would rather take the money for protection themselves. They themselves can hire professional troops. They can hire soldiers and mercenaries that were better trained, right? So these knights, they're not as disciplined to be in shape and knowing how to fight, and so scutage is what they would rather pay out to the vassals. Okay. A few other things. You have new weapons. Okay. Some of the examples are going to be the longbow, that's going to be used in the 100 Years' War. The pike, right? It's a polearm weapon, right? And that's going to be used to take down the cavalry as well. Okay. And also the growth of and the rise of national monarchs is going to be where, with the king rising to power, nobles are going to lose power and they're not going to have a strong feudal system anymore. Okay, here are an example of the crossbow. It came originally from the Chinese, but it was also used effectively with the longbow in the 100 Years' War. So the crossbow is much powerful, can shoot farther than a regular bow and arrow, but the longbow has a faster reload time compared to the crossbow, which we'll get to later. Here you have some foot soldiers that are reenacting. They are holding some pole arms. That's what they use to take down this long pole with a pointy end or a sharp end. Okay, and then cannons are also used to take down castles, and so those are all new weapons that essentially can bring down feudalism. All right. So let's talk about the monarchies. Some of the goals. If you are a king of England, right, your goal is to build a kingdom that will outlast your life, that will go beyond your years, and you can then have your heir to the throne take over, and just like any other feudal lord, except on a national scale. Okay, so the inheritance of the crown, instead of electing someone, right, you can say, oh, I'm passing this down on to my oldest son, which is what we call the term primogeniture. Primogeniture is where you have the succession of the firstborn son, then takes over all of the property and all the goods and stuff, and that's essentially what they're trying to do, build a kingdom that lasts to go on and on. There's going to be a power struggle, though, with monarchies. The power struggle is between the nobles and the king, in the sense where the nobles are always trying to keep their power, keep their rights, and the king's trying to take them away. Over time in England, they're going to be the first ones to set the example, is that the Magna Carta was written. We have some exposure to this. The Magna Carta essentially was a contract in saying that the kings cannot just act however they feel, right? They cannot just decree whatever they want, right? But they need to have a procedure. They must follow written law, and especially the king is not above the law. The king must follow the Magna Carta. Usually, the king has unchecked power, can do whatever he wants. The Magna Carta is one of the first examples of the king in Europe needing to follow procedural law. Okay. Then you have to establish a parliament that comes about 50 years later. The king is now held to needing to summon a council, right? And that he is not the sole decision maker. So that's the significance of it. That the king must take advice from those that are lower than him, from nobles and barons. And the reason why the nobles and barons demand that you must listen to us, because the king is taxing them, right? And so if you're a noble, I'm paying money, he better listen to me in some way, okay? So the parliament structure is split into two houses. You have the Houses of Lords and Houses of Commons. Lords, obviously the nobility. The Commons, you have your vassals, your knights, and just your regular people, middle-class people. The significance of the growth of the national monarchies is that, we're going to see that these kings are going to take and rise and hold power, but at the same time, there's going to be the idea of a necessary representative government. It's not just a sole monarchy, but there's actually some representation. Okay, all right, getting through this. So we talked about how the Catholic Church is going to be one of those things that will hold on to culturally throughout Europe, and they're actually going to hold a lot of influence and power. One thing that it'll take a huge hit is in the Great Schism. So you guys have read chapter 10, and talks about the Great Schism that comes in the 1300s. But in 1054, this is the first Great Schism that separates the East and the West. Do not get them confused. The Great Schism that comes later with the Council of Constance, that is just the Great Schism of the West that talks about France and Italy. It's talking about the Roman Catholic Church in Rome, and also the Eastern Orthodox Church in Constantinople. They're now separating. The main reason is because a lot of the Greek patriarchs in the East, and then the bishops in Rome, they felt that, oh, they're so different. And slowly over time, though they have the same values, they felt that they're so different now, they wanted to break off from each other. They did not want to recognize each other anymore. A major event that happened is the Crusades. I don't want to go into detail, but essentially, the Crusades had different stages, and knights are being sent off. They want to volunteer. This is where chivalry and violence kind of plays into, where they're showing honor and glory for their kingdom. At the same time, another reason why they're joining is because it's seen as a way where they can not be damned to eternity, to hell, if they go fight. If they die fighting for their religion, then in a sense they will be guaranteed salvation. If they survive, then they can reduce their punishment in purgatory. A lot of things that are very unbiblical, but that's what they wanted to do, to pursue and take the Holy Land for the Catholic Church. It was very expensive. It was disastrous. Many people died. Ultimately, it was a failure. However, a few things that taken out of the Crusades that showed Europe something was that Europe had an ability to possibly reach the lands outside of them, colonize lands outside of them, and they are now in contact with the outside world and saying, wow, this place is so rich, right? The Holy Land of Jerusalem and the Middle East actually had a lot of other civilizations that were very developed, and so that pushed them to say, we want to develop our continent as well. Okay, all right. In the Catholic Church, there's this method called monasticism. It's the way of teaching of monks, right? And so monks basically had to see their faith as very meditative and associative. Okay, so what that means is that they just read the Bible, they just meditate upon it. They don't care of making any logical connections. They are not trying to really dig deep themselves, but you just have, for example, like a bishop or a monk that will sit passively, listen, sing, and you have one person that's just reading line by line in the Bible, and it's very dry and dull, but that's what they thought that was holy, that was religious. Okay, from monasticism of the old style, right? Monks don't question anything; they just accept, right? They don't question anything. Scholasticism is going to come up. Okay, scholasticism comes from monasticism in the sense where teaching and writing is going to come out. Universities are going to develop scholasticism because they want to understand the Christian faith. They're going to be active. They're going to be initiative. They're going to be hands-on, and they want to reconcile. Is there any questions to the Bible? Okay, so in urban towns, a lot of times there's a lot of haggling, bargaining, and arguing, and that's what scholasticism is. It's very argumentative, right? And so in practice, what are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to advance their knowledge, for one, right? They're trying to form arguments and saying, no, the Bible is logical, and these are the reasons for it. And so they take on a lot of ancient texts, such as the Bible, St. Augustine, right? But also Greco-Roman things such as classical literature and Roman laws. Okay, the key values that they still hold on to between scholasticism and monasticism in the church is that faith is still primary. Faith precedes logical understanding and reasoning. Okay, the significance is that Europeans begin to be very disciplined in thinking, very Greek of them, right? Debating skills, argumentation, and it's a thing that will carry into centuries to come. There are critics of scholasticism where they're accused of maybe you're putting too much logic and not enough faith in the Bible, and even why are you using non-Christian texts? Okay, so a lot of staunch Catholics during this time are saying, you should love, the Bible, love your God, not use logic. It's a religious experience. Okay, Thomas Aquinas is going to be one of the main guys that resembles scholasticism, right? So, as a scholastic himself, he says that Christianity is a religion of reason, and perfection is based upon obtaining knowledge, and it's not about replacing your knowledge with your faith. It's a combination of both. Okay, reason and faith are not in conflict, and so he has his most famous work, Summa Theologica, and so he says that theology concerns itself with knowledge, and theology is the study of God, which has been revealed to man, and man must accept it by faith. Okay, the knowledge that you have, you must accept it by faith. All right, to end, finally, okay, we talked about monasticism, and because you have the monastery movement that came out through the Middle Ages, monks are the ones who are learning. But over time, you're going to see that different types of scholars are going to go around, and they're going to start their own universities, right? Colleges. First two places are going to be Paris and Bologna, and these universities are not campuses. Okay, it's really just a group of people, a corporation of people. By 1300, there's going to be about 20 different universities, and slowly, more and more, centers of learning are going to develop. Some of the topics that they are going to be studying is going to be theology, law, medicine, and arts. These are the main ones. And the significance is that there's the revival of learning. Okay, if you go to the university, eventually you can receive a bachelor's of arts, bachelor's of sciences, bachelor's of theology, master's of theology, master's of divinity, all these types of degrees. Learning is being revived. Just to let you know, our universities today hold on to a lot of those same values, just that we meet on a campus, whereas before it was like you meet in the square, just people. I'm part of the university. Okay, all right.